If you're looking for Magic cards, look no further than Flipside Gaming. They have all the latest Magic singles and product that you need to actually leave the house and battle in Magic the Gathering. And right now, if you would like to save 10% on your orders from Flipside Gaming, use the promo code CGB at checkout. That is promo code CGB. Hello and welcome back to another day in the arena. It's me, it's CGB, and today we're dissecting another pro level deck, and today we are going to focus on Golgari Midrange by Seth Manfield. This deck recently made the top 8 of GP Milwaukee, and there's a lot of things to talk about in Golgari. It is a interesting color choice with a lot of depth to it and a lot of choices, and I was really excited to make this video. So first I'm going to tell you how the video will go, and you can skip to the parts you most want to skip to. I'll try to leave some timestamps for you in the description. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about Seth Manfield, the player who most recently used the deck, or at least the version that we're looking at here. So we'll do a player profile on Seth Manfield. Then we'll do the deck tech and talk specifically about the cards in this deck. After that, we'll do the sideboard guide and talk about how to sideboard in certain matchups. And then we'll get into best 2 out of 3 competitive gameplay. So that's the way that the video is going to roll. Let's start from the top by talking about Seth Manfield. Seth Manfield is one of the more accomplished players, often ranked #1 in the world many times, and is usually in the top 5 at almost all the time. I can't remember the last time he was outside of that window. It's been many years now. Seth Manfield has 16 Grand Prix tournament top 8s with 5 wins. Grand Prix often have over 1,000 players in them. To be in the top 8 16 times and win 5 times is absolutely amazing. Also, Seth, in even bigger, higher stakes, best of the best tournaments, the Pro Tour, has 4 top 8s and a win. Once upon a time, Seth was our world champion. Yes, Seth won the Magic the Gathering World Championships in, where was it here? Forgive me. Yes, 2015, 2016. And most recently, Seth was in a Player of the Year playoff with Luis Salvato and lost in the end, but I believe it's Seth's 3rd time being runner-up for Player of the Year. So when I'm watching Magic the Gathering coverage and when I'm looking at deck lists, this is a name that stands out. I always want to see what Seth is doing. The winnings, if you like money, $313,000 playing Magic the Gathering, 436 lifetime pro points. Pretty amazing, and recently, very recently, awarded and voted into the Pro Tour Hall of Fame. So we're talking about one of the best, and if you see his name when browsing deck lists, you should stop. Pay attention. Have a look. And I'm really excited to talk about this specific Golgari deck today, so let's transition into that part. So this deck, Golgari Midrange, so many options, so many ways to build it, so many things to do. All of you have seen the deck by now. It's all over Arena, and it's both popular in best of 1 and in best of 3 formats. The deck is very flexible with a sideboard in best of 3, as we'll get into soon. The sideboarding guide, especially this take on the sideboard, gives you so much flexibility in almost every matchup. There are not really any matchups where you're not strengthening your deck with your sideboard, which is what you want in a good best out of 3 deck. This deck focuses mostly on an early game built around a bit more mana and a bit of explore. You sometimes see Seeker Squire in here to get more triggers off Wildgrowth Walker, but Druid of the Cowl takes that spot in this deck because the real idea being to get to a higher mana point quicker and be able to cast expensive removal spells like Vraska's Contempt, Ravenous Chupacabra, as well as Planeswalkers like Vivien Reid and Carnage Tyrant earlier, is better than an extra Explorer, even if there is a Wildgrowth Walker involved. 3 Wildgrowth Walker instead of 4, and the 4th is nowhere to be found. Really, if you want to draw 1 of a card, but not more than that very often, as an extra one isn't as good, then typically a 3 is a good number. So this is a good 3-up for the deck, as usually the second Wildgrowth Walker doesn't trigger the first one, therefore there's diminishing returns on drawing them, and you don't want them in the control matchups. Instead, how about a Midnight Reaper? One Midnight Reaper that, if you draw it against control or in a grindy street fight type mid-range duel, can draw a bunch of cards and keep you ahead with Find Finality to get it back and a Memorial Folly over and over again. It's a pretty good card. So Midnight Reaper getting the nod here as a 1-of, with an additional copy in the sideboard for the matchups where it is good. A few cast downs. Assassin's Trophy giving your opponent a mana advantage can be devastating in a number of matchups. There is one Assassin's Trophy in the sideboard. The flexibility is not to be denied, but almost every deck is going to offer you an intense target for a cast down, and some decks even main deck Decklist Honor Guard. They really hate Golgari. So having some cast downs available for Decklist Honor Guards in game 1 is a big game, and it matters a lot right now. The 4 Jadelight Rangers, not a lot to say here except you love your Explorer triggers and you need your lands to play your expensive stuff. It makes Jadelight Ranger the perfect bridge card. 3 Vraska's Contempts in the main is a nod to 2 things. 1, the exile removal is really good against Rekindling Phoenix and sometimes an Adanto Vanguard that you're having trouble blocking, although normally putting some bodies on the field to get in front of it isn't that big of a deal, you just find them back later. But Rekindling Phoenix, you're not able to block that, and killing it's a big deal. Also, in the mirror, where the Planeswalkers can really matter and be hard to get to because of all the creatures on the board, Vraska's Contempt is a big deal there too. So you see a bit of a spike here in the 4 spot, as we only have, and it's another good reason to have Druid of the Cowl ready to go, because you really want to be able to play your Karn, your Vraska's Contempt, your Chupacabra a turn earlier with so many 4-drops. Karn also making the cut. This takes the place of Vraska the Golgari Queen, which some people may find horrible. If you hate that so much, you can run the Golgari Queen. I won't yell at you. Golgari Queen has her moments, but most of the time this deck needs its lands, and the mistake I see most often with the Golgari Queen is players plussing it and sacrificing their lands before they have 5 or 6 mana on the battlefield. You really need your lands in these decks, and only in extreme situations should you make that play. Karn almost always finds you more lands. Land. That's sort of what Karn does. So I think that Karn is better for this take on the deck. The Golgari Queen can stay in the decks that need to sacrifice permanents to flip their Journey to Eternities and make their Stitcher suppliers fill their graveyard, and that kind of shenanigan. Then we have Vivien Reid. Killing flyers. It's a big deal with this deck, and being able to shoot down Doom Whisperers and Aurelias and all the Lyras, all the other big things, that's a big deal. If you can't shoot something down or blow up an Experimental Frenzy, you can dig for more creatures. And this deck, since it uses creatures for removal spells, it uses creatures for life gain, it uses creatures for card draw, and it uses creatures to just provide a giant hexproof threat that can't be countered. Getting to use that +1 is never a consolation prize. It's a very powerful engine that keeps the deck running. And then we have Find Finality. If you are under pressure, Finality can wipe the board. If you are applying pressure, Find can keep the pressure coming. This card is such a crucial part to the deck. I'm sure you'll see it in the games. But the Finality side can also be game-breaking if you get out Carnage Tyrant and resolve Finality, keeping your Carnage Tyrant alive and killing all the stuff that they want to put in front of Carnage Tyrant. So, in the mana base, 23 lands because of all the Elves and Explore, and a Memorial to Folly to just get something back one more time. Another card that we don't run is Golgari Findbroker. This card is popular in a number of lists, but Seth cuts it, and I heard it described, not by Seth, but by somebody else, as a 2-for-1 in a deck full of better 2-for-1s, and I don't think that that's wrong. The games that actually come down to I find my Findbroker, I find back my Findbroker, all of that could just be I use Memorial Folly to get a Carnage Tyrant, and the Carnage Tyrant kills you most of the time. So that's why you don't see Findbroker in the deck. In the sideboard, we have 3 Duress, 2 Cast Down, 1 Assassin's Trophy, 2 Golden Demise, 1 Midnight Reaper, 2 Deathgorge Scavenger, 1 Reclamation Sage, 1 Doom Whisperer, 1 Eldest Reborn, and 1 Vraska Relic Seeker. A lot of 1-ofs and a couple of 2-ofs, the only 3-of being Duress. The idea of this sideboard, what I love about it, is the flexibility. There are a number of cards that you bring in a number of matchups, and you can really customize the deck as you go, as you'll see in the sideboard guide. So let's get into the sideboard guide. I have a number of matchups to review, so this might be slightly longer than normal, but if you want the too long didn't read version, I'm going to try to put those in the description for you. Let me know if you enjoy the format, if you like having it in the description, if you use the sideboard guide. That really helps me know what I should spend my time on here in the videos and deck techs. Let's talk about the red matchup. Red is a deck that I'm not afraid to battle with Golgari, and I really do like the matchup. For this specific matchup, I take out the Midnight Reapers, as losing life is very bad. I take out Karn because they are hard to keep alive, and they also don't have too much impact. Ticking down gives the opponent some Chain Whirler bait. Ticking up is something they can ignore for several turns. I cut the Eldest, well, we don't bring in the Eldest Reborn, it's a little slow. The Carnage Tyrants are very slow. You're going to see this in a few matchups with the sideboard guide, and you're going to be amazed because some of them even involve blue decks. But in the matchups where the plan is to win with whatever and grind and grind and grind, it doesn't matter what you win with. Eventually, you can win with a giant Wildgrowth Walker, or something of that nature, or just a beatdown of Jadelight Rangers. You don't need a 6-mana trample hexproof to win the games where you're just grinding the opponent out. So, the Carnage Tyrants, in that case, are just a very expensive card in a matchup that goes very fast. So I put the Carnage Tyrants in the sideboard. I keep the Vraska there for a similar reason as a 6-drop. Golden Demise I actually leave in the sideboard in this matchup because I guess it depends. If you end up against a red deck and they are really spewing things, and maybe this is also better on the draw, but I don't really think that Golden Demise is needed in the matchup to kill the tiny creatures out of the red deck. I think that we can pair up and face up and square up against those red creatures just fine with what we leave in the deck. I trim 1 Llanowar Elf. I never want a hand reliant on 2 in case of a Goblin Chain Whirler, and I don't put in Duress, as attacking the hand is a little bit slow and the red deck's goal is to empty their hand. Let's talk about what is in the deck. We go up to 4 cast downs so we can shoot those Chain Whirlers and annoying wizards down cheaply. I do add the Assassin's Trophy, not only a cheap removal spell, but the flexibility to take out their Experimental Frenzy is key. Then we get Deathgorge Scavenger, a little bit of life gain. This card doesn't tend to live very long, but if it can come down, exile a creature, and gain 2 life, that's great. Keep in mind that exiling the spells isn't bad either. If their Get-To Lava Runners can't gain haste and become 2/2 haste creatures, if they're just 1/2s in the late game, that's actually not bad. So don't forget to also exile their spells when you have the time, although the life gain usually takes priority. A Reclamation Sage can take on Experimental Frenzy or just be a body that you throw in the way. The Chupacabras and the Contempts all stay. Just kill their stuff. Keep them from getting creature damage in and find ways to gain life in the long term with Wildgrowth Walker and Deathgorge Scavenger, and you should be alright. Doom Whisperer is very hard to deal with, so that's in the deck along with all the Vivien Reids. Once you get a Vivien Reid down, it can either kill the Experimental Frenzy or tag team a Phoenix with a cast down, or Vivien Reid just keeps digging you up more and more gas, and the opponent does sort of have to attack it. It's like life gain. Find you want to hang on to, and you want to play it in the late game, not usually to wipe the board, but to get back Wildgrowth Walker and a Jadelight Ranger, and then get a big life boost on a turn where your opponent is tapped out of either resources or mana. So the long game that you play for is you try to get Wildgrowth Walker and Jadelight Ranger going. If at any stage in the game you can do that, you're pretty favored to win. The only other way out of that for the opponent is Experimental Frenzy. Make sure that you have your Reclamation Sage, Vivien Reid, or Assassin's Trophy ready to blow it up, and you should be in a good place against red. Next up, we'll cover Jeskai. Good old Jeskai control. You may have guessed it, the Carnage Tyrants don't go anywhere in this one. Although there is some argument that Jeskai with the white side has a lot of ways to deal with it in Cleansing Nova, Settle the Wreckage, Expansion Explosion on Deafening Clarion, but still, Carnage Tyrant is your #1 threat. What we do cut are the cast downs. You may want to edit this a little if they play a lot of Crackling Drakes. The Wildgrowth Walkers, we don't need those in this matchup very much. One of the Find Finalities. They can be a little bit clunky, and with Exile and Seal Away, especially if you see a lot of Settle and Seal Away, you may want to cut even more of them. Then we have the Golden Demise. Of course, we don't need that unless they, for some reason, try the Legion War Boss strategy against you. You may want to grab a Golden Demise, but I don't see them trying it against you too much. Deathgord Scavenger is an interesting beater that can hold off Search for Azcanta. If the opponent runs Search for Azcanta, you may want your Deathgord Scavengers. They can be very annoying for that. And I also cut Ravenous Chupacabra. Honestly, we still have a lot of removal after board. When you get into the board, you see that we have the Assassin's Trophy, we have the Vraska's Contempts, we have the Vivien Reids. So I'm not really worried about Chupacabra versus things like Niv Mizzet, and I'm not really worried about Chupacabra versus things like Lyra, but you could bring this back in if your opponent's on the spam Niv Mizzet plan. It might be better than the Find Finalities. There is a lot of adjusting to do based on the cards that you see. But Duress is a must. Get Duress in there and try to not just jam it on turn 1. Try to play it usually on the turn right before Teferi resolves, or right before you would play your Carnage Tyrant or attack with your Carnage Tyrant to take out their Cleansing Nova or Settle the Wreckage. Also, Midnight Reaper, be very mindful of playing this. We add the second copy. Be mindful of playing this into the Clarion, but not into counter magic if you can help it. It's sort of an awkward dance. And then once you have it on the field, it's quite possible you don't want to attack with it because of Seal Away or Settle the Wreckage if you have figured out your opponent plays those cards. Vraska's Contempt, hitting Teferi, Assassin's Trophy hitting Teferi, Eldest Reborn possibly hitting Teferi, does give us outs to the dreaded villain of Dominaria. And I still like Vivien Reid in the deck to take down Niv Mizzet, as well as dig deeper and just provide a great threat. If we get on the board early, what happens, the way that you want it to play, is you play some creatures, the opponent sweeps the board or plays Settle the Wreckage, then when they tap out, you resolve Vivien Reid, Karn, Vraska Relic Seeker, a Planeswalker to give you some advantage. The opponent may have to play Teferi, tick down on it, which puts it away temporarily, and then you untap and kill the Teferi with hopefully an Eldest Reborn, Vraska's Contempt, something like that. Or if you can possibly play an elf the same turn that you also play one of these, so you have a 1 beater to go kill Teferi, that's really good as well. Of course, Carnage Tyrant. How to play around Settle, when to play around Settle, when to wait for Duress. Most of the time, you have 3, make them answer it again and again. You usually want to be jamming with your Carnage Tyrant. If you're not sure, but you're not gaining another advantage and you're just giving them more turns to draw what they need, it's usually better to just attack. Let's go into Golgari versus the Drake deck. Those Drakes are around a lot these days, fortunate, and they were a really tough matchup for Golgari. I think that this version is pretty favored. This is another version where our plan is to grind them down, and even though they have blue in their deck, I'm cutting Carnage Tyrant as a big dumb animal that costs 6 mana and cannot block one of the Drakes. Instead, the plan is to grind them down, take away their cards, kill or exile their Drakes, and then beat them with whatever is left over. Now, they can also turn into a Niv Mizzet deck, but we still have a lot of answers to that after Sideboard. What we do bring in is a Doom Whisperer. It can get in the path of the Drakes and can sometimes be hard for them to kill. They usually have to find a Beacon Bolt, and we can get it back a few times. And I trim a Find Finality, but we do keep 2 in. Sometimes wiping the board of a couple of Drakes is really key, but mostly Find is good in this matchup. They have Lava Coils, but they can't Lava Coil everything, and getting back Chupacabras to kill multiple Drakes is a pretty big game. Most of your games against Drakes will be ended by Wildgrowth Walker. Again, over time, you wear them out of removal, wear them out of resources, and use Find to team up your Wildgrowth Walker with your Jadelight Ranger. You pad your life total, and you beat down. Always be mindful that the opponent could be doing some maximized velocity Enigma Drake shenanigans, so if you have the choice, leave your Vraska's Contempts available. It is kind of weird to cut Cast Down in this matchup. You may not want to. It is quite possible this should be in the deck instead of cards like Find. This is a point of real I'm not sureness for me on this one. The thing is, I don't want too much removal. I want just enough. And if I have Vivien Reid, Eldest Reborn, Chupacabras that I can get back, and Vraska's Contempt, it seems like enough removal to keep the Drakes at bay. However, perhaps Cast Down as a cheaper option, as all of these are rather expensive, is necessary. Deathguard Scavenger taking out Arc-like Phoenix is very nice. They'll probably play better around it in the post-board games, so you'll need another way to get the Phoenix in the graveyard. Be mindful of when you play this. You don't want to play it without exiling something important from the graveyard. And Midnight Reaper drawing cards helps you keep up with all their cantripping. I like Duress hitting a cantrip, hitting a Tormenting Voice or a Chart of Course. I didn't think it would be a big deal, but it often is. And also taking out a Lava Coil so you can get Wildgrowth Walker cooking is a pretty good strategy as well. Yeah, so really, it depends on the version of Drakes you're up against. If they run Electromancer, I've ignored Electromancer pretty successfully a lot of times, but if they're running a version with a whole bunch of Drakes and Maximize Velocity, it feels like Cast Down needs to come back into the deck. Next up is Boros Aggro. This is where Golden Demise really shines, so we definitely bring that in, as well as leaving all the fine finalities so we can use the finality side. This is another matchup where Carnage Tyrant can get cut because it's another big dumb animal, and our plan is to win with Giant Wildgrowth Walker once we get around to it. Bringing in enchantment removal is pretty key. Between Conclave Tribunal, History of Benalia, Ixalan's Binding, and Experimental Frenzy out of the sideboard, you're going to want your Reclamation Sage, your Assassin's Trophy, and your Vraska Relic Seeker, as well as all your copies of Vivien Reid, even if there aren't big flyers to hit. The opponent could sideboard in some Lyras or something like that, but you still have Chupacabras, and Vivien Reid takes big advantage of those too. I do like cutting Vraska's Contempt for more efficient removal and lowering the curve. I'm not sure, so yeah, I would keep it that way, and I'd keep the elves to get on the board nice and early, even with Golden Demise. Now, there is a chance you want to trim some of your Llanowars because of Golden Demise. I don't like this because even if I have the Golden Demise, I like to have an early elf just to get ahead on board and try to save this for when we have City's Blessing. But I can see how you could call it a Nombo, and if it bothers you too much, bringing back in another Contempt isn't too bad. But I would leave in my elves. I really want to be on the board nice and early. Midnight Reaper can certainly come out in this matchup, as we don't want to pay life for cards when our life total is under so much pressure. I cut Karn because it's difficult to defend, and I'm looking for a lower curve in general. Versus Angels, the Boros Angel deck. I've suddenly seen it more and more online again, and it kind of requires its own discussion. I didn't mention this in the last discussion in Boros, because they don't always run it, but Boros Angels always runs Tocatli Honor Guard. So, Tocatli Honor Guard is this annoying critter right here. It is rare, so for a long time in Arena we did not see these. Crafting them is a bit of a commitment, and your rare wild cards are very valuable. But creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger? Well, let's see, how many of those do we have? Oh yeah, everything that explores. The Wildgrowth Walker, the Reclamation Sage, the Ravenous Chupacabras. It shuts down a big chunk of the Golgari deck, and when Golgari is too popular, more Honor Guards show up. That's why we get in all the cast downs, even though they can't kill the legendary angels like Aurelia, Shalai, and Lyra. They also aren't good against Rekindling Phoenix, but you have to kill Tocatli Honor Guard. So in they come. Even if you don't see them in game 1, you will probably see them in game 2. So as a preventative measure, I would get those in the deck right away. This is another matchup where we end up in kind of a mid-range street fight, where the slowest deck with the most card advantage and a Planeswalker that stays on the field will likely win. But they have flyers, you really don't. So a lot of times their creatures are unblockable, which means you have to answer their creatures much more than you can stick threats, which means out comes Karn, it's difficult to defend. Out comes Carnage Tyrant, it's another big dumb ground animal. However, we'll win with whatever's left over, and most of the time what's left over is a Vivien Reid getting to an ultimate type status. Not necessarily a Wildgrowth Walker, but anything can win once you ultimate a Vivien Reid. Looking down the line, we also want the Assassin's Trophy to take out those big flyers, or blowing up Ixalan's Binding and Conclave Tribunal can be crucial. We have Reclamation Sage for similar tasks, along with 3 Vivien Reids and a Vraska, but you want every way you can to blow up Ixalan's Binding. One way that the game can spiral is you have your Vivien Reid, you kill a Lyra, but then they drop an Ixalan's Binding, shuts down your Vivien Reid, and you can't get it back, and you draw more Vivien Reids. That is not a good look. But in the meantime, to kill the Lyras and such, we have all the Contempts and all the Chupacabras. I even bring in a Doom Whisperer. Sometimes you just want to get in front of Aurelia and not let it keep coming. And we have an Eldest Reborn because we're in a mid-range street fight, and the card advantage is what you are all about. We'll go to Mono Blue. Against Mono Blue, we want to cut our deck down to a lean, mean, creature-killing machine. If Mono Blue doesn't have a creature, they can't win. They can't put a Curious Obsession on it. They can't protect it with Dive Down. They can't, everything about their deck is protecting a key creature, a key threat. So if we are just killing stuff, and especially if we're doing it cheaply, so we're not getting blown out by Dive Down, we should be taking the game. So I cut out just about everything expensive except for Vivien Reids, because these are also mean flyer eating machines, and their ultimate is usually how the game comes to a conclusion in this battle. And I get in a lot of cheap stuff. Duress to attack the dive downs and counter magic to make things resolve. The Assassin's Trophy and the cast downs to get those Curious Obsessed creatures off the battlefield quickly and cheaply. Wildgrowth Walker to buy some time against them, as an out of control Wildgrowth Walker can even race a creature with Curious Obsession, because you're gaining life and smashing face at the same time. It really turns the tempo. Reclamation Sage. Just take the Curious Obsession off the opposing creature. This plays around Dive Down, because they can't protect the enchantment with Dive Down, and they can't spell pierce the Reclamation Sage. So this is often the right play, even when you're holding a cast down or something like that. If the opponent has a mana up and you have a choice between casting down their creature with Curious Obsession or Reclamation Saging it, and they only have 1 mana available, use the Reclamation Sage. Plays around Spell Pierce, plays around Dive Down. Then we also have Golden Demise. Vivien Reid, by the way, can do the same trick later in a game. If you suspect your opponent has Dive Down and Vivien resolves and they have a Curious Obsessed creature, minus Vivien, kill the Curious Obsession. All their dorks are just little dorks, and we have plenty of ways to kill them. But getting rid of their card advantage will definitely cut them off from what their deck really wants to do. Then we have all the Contempts and the Chupas too. I thought about cutting Contempt as it's a bit slow. In the end, I chose to cut Finality instead. The opponent isn't interested in killing your stuff, so Find won't usually get anything, and Finality is just a super expensive sweeper that is very likely to be countered when we get to it. Midnight Reaper can go too, since the opponent doesn't really interact with you on the ground and you don't want to pay your life for cards anyway. Deathguard Scavenger, I don't think I want here. The life gain isn't that crucial. The graveyard, to my knowledge, isn't that crucial. And Karn, again, difficult to protect and not doing much if the opponent's bashing you with Curious Obsession. I thought about Doom Whisperer, but I didn't want something that's really a good target for Exclusion Mage. Eldest Reborn is a very expensive Spell Pierce target, and we're already running a lot of those, so I cut it. And again, cutting Carnage Tyrant against blue, just a big dumb animal that takes too long to cast. Sorry. And yep, Vraska, another big Spell Pierce target in a deck that already has a few too many of those. Finally, we'll talk about the mirror. And the mirror is, as you can see, no, I don't board up into a 72 card deck in the mirror, even though that is a legal approach that you can take. But the thing about the mirror is it all depends. There are so many builds of this deck that do so many different things that how you play in sideboard for the mirror, you have to be flexible. You have to recognize what your opponent is trying to do, and you have to be able to adapt to it. Do you want an Eldest Reborn? It depends. Is your opponent playing Thrashing Brontodon? Did they play around Eldest Reborn? It may not even be a good card if your opponent is always making sure to keep an elf on the battlefield with their Carnage Tyrant and their Vivien Reid. So it may not even be a good sideboard option at all. Whether or not you want your Carnage Tyrants, yes. And you want your Finalities. The Finality Carnage Tyrant tag team is the end game for the deck. And I think that you want that no matter what. You may want Reclamation Sage if your opponent is running 3 or 4 Eldest Reborn, if they're all about that card. You probably don't cut Vivien Reid in most cases. Do you want to Doom Whisper? It depends. Does your opponent run Cast Down? Did you see a lot of Chupacabra Cast Down type action? Then Doom Whisper is probably just a big awkward creature, plus Vivien Reid can kill it, meaning it's likely on the chopping block most of the time. How many Chupacabras do you want after post board? Does your opponent run Doom Whisper? And do you have a ton of ways to answer that? Cast Down is similar. I would say that most of the time you want to trim on your Chupacabras, but I always like leaving one, because you can get it back with Find and Memorial to Folly, and it's good to have that available to grind. Also, I can usually trim my Cast Downs. What exactly you're casting down you need to have in mind, but post-board, often Midnight Reaper is the most likely target, and there aren't a ton of ways to easily kill that. Vraska's Contempt, I guess, but 4 mana versus a 3 mana is not exactly efficient, so you may want to keep some cast downs after board. It all depends on what you see. I personally don't like being the Wildgrowth Walker deck after board. Wildgrowth Walker after board, to me, in this matchup, it's not really supposed to be about beatdown. It's supposed to be about board position. And by the time you start getting your Wildgrowth Walker huge, the opponent killing it with a Vraska's Contempt, a Chupacabra, a cast down, just sort of takes away what you invested into it. And in the end, you didn't get that much extra value. The life total really doesn't matter if you have no board and your opponent is ultimating a Vivien or smashing you with a Carnage Tyrant that you can't kill. So I don't think that the life total is that big of a deal. Also, Deathgorge Scavenger, I think you want this no matter what. Taking away their options with Find Finality is a pretty great way to go, as well as Memorial to Folly. Plus, it can gain some life, and it can make up for the loss of Wildgrowth Walker. Do you want Duress? I don't think I want all of them, especially on the draw, where your opponent on the play, you don't want to turn 1 Duress them and see a hand of nothing but creatures. What you want Duress for is that turn when they're trying to set up Find Finality, or they explore a Vivien Reid to the top, and you can play in a way so that they don't resolve it the next turn. So I think you do want some Duresses, but I think you need to limit how many you have. Getting Find out of the hand is a big game for Duress, so I'm thinking 2 is probably a right-ish number. I do think you always want your mana creatures. I wouldn't be surprised now that you've trimmed on Wildgrowth Walker that you can trim on a Branchwalker, but I would keep Jadelight Ranger. You need all the lands you can in this matchup. And then for the final trim, man, again, so much depends on what you're playing against, what you saw. Perhaps a big Vraska isn't the answer when the end game is Carnage Tyrant and Find Finality, but man, do I love having an extra big card advantage and killing machine in my deck. But since there aren't that many enchantments to target, I think that Vraska could likely stay in the sideboard. Maybe that's a little crazy. Again, sideboard based on what you see. You will know it once you get used to sideboarding with the deck. Think about what you played against at the end of each game. Look in your opponent's graveyard, look in their exile zone, look at the board. Think about what they played and what they saw, and what cards you should have in the next game. I hope you enjoyed the sideboard guide, and I hope that you enjoyed the player profile on Seth Manfield, as well as the deck guide. I'm really excited to go play some games and see how this does, and I'll see you in the battles. We are on the draw, and this hand has Llanowar Elf into Jadelight Ranger. Hope for the best. If Jadelight gets to come down and hopefully find lands to do the rest of this hand, it's a very good hand. Of course, if Llanowar Elf dies, we could already be in a rough spot. Our opponent took 6, and they're looking at it now. They put 1 to the bottom. There could be issues with the hand. And Sacred Foundry leads off the party. Could mean a lot of things. Boros Aggro, Boros Angels, Jeskai Control. There's been some Boros Control in the meta. Wow. Game 1 to Kotley Honor Guard. That's fun. That's great. Well, this Vraska's Contempt will have to do the job. It was a fortunate draw. But let's see if this little tempo boost can help them out. I will Contempt the Honor Guard. It's just a matter of when at this point. Yep. That can go. And now Vivien can take out the Aurelia. Untap Forest. Vivien Reid. And minus, destroy target creature with flying.
Sometimes
Shoot down the Aurelia.
Means retribution.
Next turn is Carnage Tyrant. We'll see how that goes. There's a Lyra, though. Talk about a great equalizer. Let's tick up the Vivien. See what we can find.
Stop nature.
Midnight Reaper or land. I guess with the choice ahead of me, I'll take the Midnight Reaper. And here comes Carnage T. However, Carnage T and Flyers. Binding. Ouch. Good news is, if we find another way to remove that binding, we're okay, but I don't think we run that many. And a Lava Coil. Just kill it all. Now the opponent's going to start a race. Gaining 5 life makes for a good race. We might be celebrating the fact, though, that we got to 21. It may matter a lot. Alright. Let's start with a Jadelight Ranger and try to dig our way to a Ravenous Chupacabra. That's who we need. A Planeswalker. Well, that does dig harder. And it can curve with what we have. What do we have? 4 turns, supposedly? Probably 3, realistically, if our opponent can find 1 more point of damage. That's 2 activations of Karn. That is 4 cards deep. Okay. We'll try it. Let's also play this Midnight Reaper. Puts on better beats and might dig us further if something dies. And we have 14 damage on the field. Acting like 9 because Lyra gains life. So the race is in our favor right now if our opponent draws bricks. Of course, our opponents do not draw bricks. They drew a brick, and they're racing anyway. Curious. Alright, start by making them make Karn choices. Dice full of Karn choices.
Evil, are you certain of your decision?
I mean, dork or dork. Dork wins. Okay, so play out the Branchwalker, which can deal more damage, or I could hold it in case I draw a Wildgrowth Walker. But if I draw a Wildgrowth Walker, Karn can get back the Branchwalker. If I get a Wildgrowth Walker off the Karn, though, that doesn't work. But Memorial to Folly, is there an Explore creature in my yard? There is not. Alright, I'm going to use the Explore creature. Because trying to make our next draw better isn't that bad either. It's a very huge draw step for our opponent. Decides whether or not they can keep attacking. They do. They're at 14. And what is this? Settle the Wreckage? There's the draw. What if it is Settle the Wreckage? I don't think that they're going to play a main deck Settle the Wreckage. This looks as net decked as possible, and those lists just don't do that. I'm going to go for it. Let's see what happens. More likely there's some kind of a removal spell, which we can follow up with a Chupacabra. Shock. Yep. That brings us to 5, and it surely makes the opponent feel good about what's going on as they go to 1. But here is Ravenous Chupacabra. No, not much consideration given to the finality there. So a top deck for a top deck with our opponent. They're at 1. Let's just use the Karn. If they can somehow sweep this up, I don't think they can. The other way would be to get back to play another Lyra, I guess, might be a thing, but I don't think so. And that's game. Clutch draw on clutch draw. Okay, we need to keep Tocatli Honor Guard in mind, so bringing in cast downs very important. The Midnight Reapers can go. The flying life total pressure doesn't interact well with them, so we need just about anything that can kill a flyer or interact with a flyer. I also want Reclamation Sage for those Ixalan's Bindings and Histories of Benalia. But I don't think the rest of this is very important. Even a Danto Vanguard, we can put bodies in front of it, so the Golden Demise doesn't really make a lot of sense. What's weak in the matchup? Not much, to be completely honest. It's hard to figure out what to cut, but some amount of Carnage Tyrant is good cut, because the opponent is, like, we can kill them with just about anything once we've ground them out. So the idea is going to be to grind with Planeswalkers, not with Carney T. So, sorry Carney T, you get to stay home. Also, we want Vraska's Contempt in case they run Rekindling Phoenix. A big flyer to get in the way of their big flyers is just fine on the top end. We still want to explore. All 4 cast downs. I think we do need them. Tocatli Honor Guard's a thing. We're on the draw. I don't know if I want Llanowar Elves. We can certainly trim on them in some amount. I like Druid of the Cowl much better, although any of their removal actually kills Druid of the Cowl, so maybe Llanowar Elves is strictly better. And it doesn't really block anything from them. Maybe a Night token for 1 turn. Plus we cut the Carnage Tyrants, so I think that pulling a few Druid of the Cowls and a fine Finality out of the deck is fine. Alright, that's where I'm going to hang out. What they get is probably more Ixalan's Binding. Maybe they do board into a Settle the Wreckage now. They're going to keep their Tocatli Honor Guards, so we have to keep that in mind with any hand that we keep. Has to be able to kill a Tocatli Honor Guard if it's full of exploring. And we have a cast down, 5 lands, and a Vivien Reid. Ugh. I'm going to keep it though. The deck would need a really great curve to overpressure this. And they might have it. But at least we can kill a Tocatli and kill an Angel. And those are... having no answers to their threats, in my opinion, is too risky. Alright, the opponent is going to play land. The problem with cast down, of course, is that it doesn't hit the Angels. Except for the Resplendent one. Opponent with nothing yet. There must be a lot of big monsters in this hand. And I'll keep the Jadelight Ranger. Let's start growing our Wildgrowth Walker. Our opponent on the play with a hand that is doing nothing for a very long time. Rekindling Phoenix? No, it's Tocatli. Okay. Well, let's take out Tocatli. Turns off my Jadelight Ranger, and you know that some Lyras, possibly multiple Lyras, are on the way. There she is. Multiple Viviens. Let's hope that there isn't an Ixalan's Binding taking out Vivien Reid here.
Let's see. No one said restoration was painless.
If it is, let's hope we draw Assassin's Trophy or Big Vraska or Reclamation Sage to blow up the Binding. Because Vivien Reid's a pretty key card in the matchup. Lava Coil. Down goes the Walker. Alright. And a Najani that's naked. Is it getting back to Tocatli?
It is good to see you, my friend.
Yes, it is.
On your feet.
Okay, that can be annoying. We have to keep in mind that there's an active Tocatli now.
Wilds are my shield.
Which makes pretty sad Jadelight Rangers, but I'd rather have those than more land. Let's take Ajani out. Would Tocatli dare block here, knowing I have a Jadelight Ranger? Wow. It's a lot of love for Ajani. More than I would show Ajani. Some people, I think, defend their Planeswalkers too much. Graveyard for that. Forest. Second Ranger. Library. Tocatli doesn't do much to a big old Doom Whisperer. Flareon sweeping the board. So the opponent's plan was to sweep the board, then use it, tick a Johnny up, and get Tecatli back again. We'll see how that plays out with a Doom Whisperer available.
Balance comes.
Another elf is fine. So it's important to make sure you use your Vivien before you use your Doom Whisperer, unless you wanted to Vivien into something the same turn. Since I have no mana available, that didn't make a lot of sense. But I want to surveil with my Doom Whisperer quite a bit here and make sure we have the right card.
Fight again.
Tecatli shuts down entering the battlefield abilities, not static abilities like our Doom Whisperer. Alright, so right on upkeep here, let's see what we can find. -2 health, +2 top deck skills. These can go. We've got a lot of life to play with, so it'll be a while before I get too afraid. Another Vivien Reid. As long as we had a Reclamation Sage or something to deal with an Ixalan's Binding, I would feel great about taking another Vivien Reid, but stacking 2 cards doesn't make enough sense. How's our graveyard? Lots of Exploridorks. Not a way to kill the Tecatli, but Finality can do the job. Alright, we're going to put Vivien in the yard. We're going to draw the Finality. It's a bit too good to ignore. Now we'll go to the main. Let's plus Vivien Reid, see what else we find.
Meet my newest friend.
I will take a Memorial to Folly. It's better than taking a Jadelight Ranger right now. It can get back a Doom Whisperer if this dies to a Justice Strike, something like that. Although I think we would have already seen it, but you never know. This is also, there's a chance of Seal Away, some shenanigans like that. Or do we Crush Face? I think we Crush Face. If we're going to hit, let's threaten lethal. And the play is... Settle the Wreckage. One of them. Do we get our land, or do we stack our deck? We have enough land. I think I'm going to try to set up a really good draw. Another Find Finality. I feel like as long as I have this card, things can't go too badly for me, even though none of this solves the problem of the Tecatli Honor Guard. I think I'll bin. I need another removal spell. I mean, there's 4 cast downs in the deck. Vraska's a great one, and Reclamation Sage is great for Ixalan's Binding. That's what I'm looking for. And we'll put the Reclamation Sage second from the top because Vivien can find it. Decline. Play Memorial to Folly. Pass the turn. The life total is low, but trying to ninja through right now isn't really the move. There's the Binding.
Deliver us to victory.
So our opponent, I'm sure, just drew the Binding. What order did they draw these cards? They really went for some kind of a red-white control deck. So we need to get a Johnny dead. Let's see. If we attack a Johnny here, the Honor Guard... If we kill the Honor Guard, attack a Johnny, it's at 1, so it can't get something back. That's the important thing. Alright. So we're taking Vraska down, killing Tecatli Honor Guard.
I despised. I'm sorry. Were you using that?
And here we go. We have the Reclamation Sage coming to get back the Vivien Reid. And do we go get back more critters? I suppose getting some Jadelight Rangers isn't bad. Although it feels like there might be better things to get back. Like a Reclamation Sage. Yeah. The Jadelight Rangers also... they're not doing enough right now. I think I'm just going to hold this. I imagine there are other things to be afraid of. Right. Right indeed. Yeah, this finality may yet have to happen. And they're getting bigger.
Look how far you.
So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We can finality, sweep these up. Reclamation Sage, get back Vivien. Vivien, kill History of Benalia. Ajani stays on 2 and does not die. And there's nothing I can really do about that, but I make a 2/2 pirate in addition. And I think that's the way it's gonna be. We can't save the elf. Sorry. You worked hard. You tried. Blow that up.
Get that out of here.
Indeed, get that out of here. And the cascade.
Attack at will.
The advantage cascade comes crashing down. Oh, Boros, you tried to grind a grinder. All right, stuff dies. Stuff dies. It happens.
You are capable of more than you assume.
Branchy off the top. I think we'll want to play with our top card after using our Vivien Reid. Memorial to Folly can bring back Reclamation Sage if needed. All right, so Vivien Reid first.
I've seen things that would break someone like
Ouch.
you.
That didn't go quite the way I hoped.
Take no prisoners.
And now you can come out. Library for that. Our opponent might be getting Tecatli back, but at this point they'll lose a Johnny. It does turn off the Chupacabra and the Reclamation Sage, and we'll have to wait, but we have Vraska who can just kill it. Oh, they draw another Tecatli.
Strength is born of struggle.
All right, keep it coming. Show me what I can find on top of the deck.
Come to me.
A Wildgrowth Walker, perhaps? All right, Vraska, kill that thing.
Soon you will be left with nothing.
That is absolutely true, Vraska. Soon they will be left with nothing. Destroy a Johnny.
Lash out all you want.
I will hold this just to play around more Deafening Clarions. Our opponent seems to have sideboarded into a red-white control deck, as we've seen 2 Clarions now. So we'll just hold this, and yeah, they'll scoop. Today we get to choose the player of the draw. I will play. And this hand is slow, but I will try it on the play. We do have the whole top end, and most of our deck is curve stuff in the 1, 2, and 3, so we can probably draw something. Even if we don't, I sort of have faith that Contempt into Vivien Reid can get us there, but there are some decks that will run this over. If so, we'll get to sideboarding faster. There's also always the chance we draw a Llanowar Elf or a Druid of the Cowl, and everything's great. Speaking of a Llanowar Elf, and a Druid of the Cowl. Oh my, our opponent had our mana dorks got sniped and put in our opponent's deck, not in ours. They might just play a Carnage Tyrant here, and that's all she wrote. Okay, not yet. Not yet. Feeling good.
I have faith well chosen.
You get a Jadelight Ranger. Man, this is a problem. Alright. Let's exile you. Trying to. It's like a weird clicking thing going on. So one Carnage Tyrant into limbo. It looks like a full mirror. Perhaps our opponent also studied the work of Seth Manfield. And yeah, they just had the exact draw that we wanted but could not have. So at this point, I'm going to see my top card, but then I don't really want to show them more of my deck. What they've seen so far is that I play Vraska's Contempt. They don't need to see any more. Okay, the mirror, the mirror, the mirror. So, I don't think that this is where you need Wildgrowth Walker stuff, and you definitely don't need Golden Demise. Hitting a Finality at a crucial point or a find can be really good. And a big old Doom Whisperer dies to a Chupa, but Midnight Reaper and sort of spamming the Midnight Reaper over and over is probably where we need to be. Eldest Reborn can hit Carnage Tyrant, but I'm not really optimistic about that. I think I want the big Haymakers. I want to attack their graveyard. I don't know what Reclamation Sage would really be doing. I don't see it. Obviously, the only thing I have here is an Eldest Reborn and an Assassin's Trophy, just to make sure that things die. We could sub in a little more spot removal so that we don't die to the early rush of things, but I'm going to take out the Walker, and I'm probably going to take out a couple Branchwalkers myself. I mean, everything is just sort of this Chupa fodder anyway, so do I need those? Vivien Reid probably does the least that it does in this matchup. So it's hard to not to keep one because they're so great, but you definitely want any kind of mana acceleration. 4 cast downs is probably a bit much. In fact, maybe it's a bit much at all since most of their dorks are the same. Still, you kill their else, you take away their mana advantage, so I think that's pretty important. Maybe the few Jadelight Rangers can be trimmed. A Chupacabra. All their stuff is kind of the same that you can Chupa. Maybe you don't Chupa at all. Maybe one for the option is okay, but maybe we just don't Chupa at all. I guess all the exile is a lot better. Alright, I'm going to roll with this. Duress to hit a Planeswalker or a Find Finality. Often you can target it really well if you see them explore one of those cards to the top on a turn when you know they won't cast it the next turn, or you can play in such a way that they wouldn't want to cast it the next turn. I'll play first. I'll still no elves, but I'll keep it. It's another slow hand. Hard to make it go away, though. Hard to just throw it back. At least our opponent didn't turn one Llanowar us this time. They made the last game look really easy. Okay, now they have the slow draw. Jadelight, set me up. Get me some more land so I can Tyrant spam my opponent. We have the combo, so to speak, of Finality and Tyrant. Graveyard. And graveyard. I just want the land so I can Tyrant. That's all I want to do. Cast Downs. Alright, you out of there. And here comes either a Ranger or Reaper. No. They are definitely on the slow train. I'm going to put out the Reaper instead of the Druid of the Cowl. I know it could result in a Tyrant next turn, but against what my opponent is doing, I'm confident they have more removal spells. And there you go. Our opponent kept plenty of cast downs. And now their Jadelight Ranger comes down. 2 lands. Must be nice. Mine did not find 2 lands. So I think we're doing Druid and Merfolk Branchwalker. Don't think there's a lot of consideration for other things, really. Graveyard, you. You can come out tapped. And there we go. Let's go, Carnage T. Here's Viv. Our opponent keeping Viv. I get it. You draw a creature every turn, and you're a creature deck. But I just don't know. I don't know that the minus does anything, and I think when the minus is doing stuff, that's when Viv is really good. All right, let's bring some beats. I think the opponent will trade with the Branchwalker. I think that's a pretty easy choice. But then we'll drop the Carnage Tyrant.
So you've got claws.
And we still have an elf with it.
I've seen things that would break someone like you.
Our opponent finds a Chupa. And do they have the Tyrant of their own? They do. Oh, man. It's a really good draw. I think they would trade Tyrants and I could Eldest Reborn their Vivien Reid. Or I could Finality. Which makes my Tyrant bigger than their Tyrant. But the minusing... Let's see, what would that leave you as? You go up to a 9-8, then -4 is a 5-4. And I could attack... This would be a something 2, 3-2. So we could still attack, hit Vivien Reid down to 1. I do think that the board is going to get uglier. That getting the Eldest Reborn cast is probably the ticket. So do I want Vivien dead, or they would have to sacrifice Vivien Reid, because if they sacrifice their Tyrant, I kill Vivien anyway. But let's give them a chance to goof. I don't think we're going to hit much better with Eldest Reborn anytime soon. That hand has to be full of something.
Scars are lessons written in skin.
All right, let's give them the option to trade a Tyrant now since we have another. And we don't want them to untap and be able to Finality their Tyrant. Okay, blocks. We could Finality right now, but I think holding it is the wise move. If our opponent has Duress, I'll regret that, but I think that we just save it. We may even need to get 2 Carnage Tyrants at some point. And Assassin's Trophy on the Eldest Reborn. Okay. That's pretty good value. And now we have a Duress. Excellent. So there you go. We take that away from them. And we drop our Tyrant. What you got? And we draw Karn. That's pretty nice. All right. Go get him, Carnage. The problem is, of course, Karn is looking at Vraska's Contempt. Don't know how we deal with that. We could get back a Midnight Reaper. Maybe the opponent would Vraska's Contempt that. I bet they would. That would open it up for Karn, which I think is better overall. Alright. Let's find... Carnage Tyrant. Midnight... Well, if they're going to Contempt something, let's grab a Jadelight Ranger. It's more value. Because Midnight Reaper would just die. And that's good enough to go to Game 3. So after seeing their deck, they seem to have kept in all the Planeswalkers and stayed really heavy on that. So keeping Doom Whisperer out makes sense. Keeping Chupa out makes sense. We may want the Last Duress. And do we want Viviens of our own to grind against that? Probably not. Do I need all these Contempts? Yes, they kept the Planeswalkers. Do I need all these cast downs? I mean, killing the elves is really what the cast downs are for. And the Assassin's Trophy, we binned that, but it can kill the Planeswalkers. The Eldest Reborn is a lot worse when they run Vivien Reid, although it kind of hit in that game. And being on the draw, I'm really worried about it doing anything. So yeah, I think we'll pull out the Eldest Reborn this time, especially since our opponents saw it. They may be careful to play around it in the following games. And other than that, I think we're good to go. Game 3. This time we have an elf and a few dorks and a Midnight Reaper. We don't have any high-end stuff, any of the top stuff, and that scares me, but it's another hand that I think you just keep and you work it out. Hopefully Branchwalkers and Midnight Reaper will help us find those things. Alright, let's get our little elf on the battlefield. It does square up nicely with the Branchwalker. I do suspect cast down. No, not this time. Very different draw from our opponent, which was all removal in the past. And there is a fine Finality. Gonna need a duress. Duress, where are you at? So I don't play out the Midnight Reaper here. I try to wait until I can play some of the Explore Dorks and then attack in with them. Especially if our opponent plays a Karn or something and that you know they wanted to block, trade, and defend Karn. That's a great time to play a Midnight Reaper. Alright, dig me up some stuff. That is not what I'm looking for. It's been just a lot of filler on top of the deck so far. No clutch spells. Chupacabra, they kept those around, huh? Opponent seems to have a different take on the mirror than I do. Yeah, no blocks here because we only want to trade. Our opponent wants to be the beatdown. We only want to trade with our Reaper on the field. We want card advantage. We want card advantage. So let's drop our Branchwalker. Another one of these. Play the Midnight Reaper. And no attacks here. This is the land our opponent knows about. Another Chupa. Yeah, they just want to beat down, I guess. Normally that doesn't matter, but if we do nothing but flood, which it's been the game so far for us, flood, flood, flood. We'll block here. This is a big Jadelight Ranger, but hopefully we can square up with it next turn or draw one of our cast downs. And I know that my opponent has the fine Finality, which is unfortunate, but there's the duress for it. They have two. Must be nice. What's better, to take the Eldest Reborn or one of the fine Finalities? Eldest Reborn would be a heck of a haymaker at this point. We might be able to play around it, but not for long, because we just don't have enough resources. Fine Finality is more mana intensive, actually, because you add 2 to whatever the cost of the things in the graveyard are. So I'll take away Eldest Reborn. Our opponent basically with a draw full of junk, and we haven't been able to answer it. Oh my. Well, there we go. Well, now at least we have a way to clean up the board again. And they binned the Wildgrowth Walker, but probably for good reason. They can find it now. And those come back. Okay, we just need to keep trading over and over and over. Do I take 4 for this Jadelight Ranger to get more things off the battlefield? Like this? I think so. Let's see, next turn my opponent untaps with 2 Jadelight Rangers, which can attack for 7. They Chupa me. I use Finality to get back, what? 2 Branchwalkers? Maybe Midnight Reaper. If I preserve my life total, I can get Midnight Reaper, and it draws more cards, and that's what we really need. We can beat this pile of trash if we can get to our stronger cards. So we just have to make sure that happens. Finality sweeping the board doesn't do anything. They just rebuild and get further and further ahead of us on cards. So this is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is 2 of that. So we have 5 mana left, so we can play Reaper and a Walker. Okay. It's a grinder, but it will get run over. But I suppose having something is better than nothing. It can probably deflect from our life total and spit up a blocker every turn. I would expect this turn to be... no? Well, maybe they drew the land, so it's still going to be a Chupacabra. Or maybe they just hit their land like a boss. And they did. They just drew it. Don't worry about it. Alright, they're still just trying to bash through me. Down to 6. But eventually that whole strategy falls apart when the board gets gummy enough.
The wilds
Or
are
it
my
should.
shield.
It may not this game. I may get wrecked. Alright, we'll play our other blocker here. And now we've got a pair of 1/3s in the way. Our opponents use their Chupacabras. Vivien of your own. Alright.
I've lost meat, my newest friend.
Land. Excellent. Just what we wanted you to hit. They don't have anything to Finality with yet. Once they play a Bronto, they may have that. Which, by the way, Bronto in the deck, we took out our Eldest Reborn, so that was part of the move there. They got back 2 Jadelight Rangers, and they're going for my face. Alright. I think that's just... the aggro plan, it's... I'm gonna stop talking about it because I may still lose this game, and then I'll feel like a fool, but I just don't know how that aggro plan's going to end. I think I want the Scavenger here. The life gain or the Carnage Tyrant. Actually, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9. Let's just Tyrant them, right? I mean, we're at 4, but if we have the Tyrant and ultimate the Vivien, we win. So, yeah. Jadelight, what you got? Set me up for another good draw? Sure. Seems nice. And here's Carnage T. Let's see, if they do another Chupa, they could get me to 2, but let them. Let's take... well, I'm going to kill their Vivien Reid next turn anyway with the Assassin's Trophy, so no attacks.
Balance comes.
No, they found their own Tyrant. And they don't play it. They're still trying to get around me. And they're keeping other Tyrant. What are they doing? I think you have to play your Tyrant there because it's one of the only ways you can make sure that you deal some damage to Vivien. Well, the endless attacking finally stopped. Alright.
No one knows the wilds like I do.
Well, they're drawing another Tyrant. Once my creatures are indestructible, we don't really care about your Tyrants. It's gonna enter tapped. When to use this? I guess now. And if they take the land, by the way, they shuffle away their Tyrant.
I'm not losing everything.
Let's see if they do it. They do. All right. All right. Waiting to see what they can come up with this time. If they have another removal spell, they can kill, say, my Jadelight Ranger. And they can throw everything at Vivien Reid to keep Vivien from ultimating. And what's up? They can also just force me to block to defend her. All right. We'll block here, we'll block here. The real question is, if we ultimate Viv, do they scoop or do we get to play and see what happens? There is an interesting case for a Finality sweeping the board, but then I just tick Viv up and ultimate it the next turn. It's a very slow tap. Uh-huh. There you go. And Bronto? Yep. Okay, we need to draw something to put in front of the Bronto. We're going to plus the Vivien again, because if we don't have creatures, it doesn't matter. And there is a Carnage Tyrant. Yes. We'll hold the last land, just to make them ask questions, and hopefully they don't draw Vraska's Contempt, as that would be the punishment. But it really wouldn't make sense to have a Vivien ultimate with no creatures on the field. That is not the game over the end game we were going for. 2 Thrashing Brontodons, when the only thing in our entire 75 it could have affected it was the 1 Eldest Reborn that we played last game. It's pretty good. So what's this? Vigilance and Trample and Indestructible? Nice. So that means we just start bashing with our Carnage Tyrant. No point in attacking with the Llanowar Elves. They would get brick-walled very easily. It's indestructible, so it's unlikely they can use our Midnight Reaper to kill us. So if we go from this point to win the game, which, okay, we have won the game, I'm going to take a little while to make a point about the Golgari Mirror. Sometimes your hand and sometimes your deck construction means that you have to beat down. And I think our opponent, the way that they construct and play this deck, just their playing tendency from getting to know them in that match, was all about beating down. Sometimes that's what you have to do, but it's not what you want to do. In the mirror, it doesn't matter often if the life total is 1 or 20 on the other side. What matters is the board. The board, the board, the board. And I think that that opponent in that game, and especially in the way that they sideboarded, keeping in their Chupacabras and running Thrashing Brontodon, it was just trying to be aggro, aggro, aggro all the time. The way that they used their finds to just keep the creatures coming back, coming back, coming back, but that's not where you want to be in the match. The longer the match goes, even with a very mediocre draw like we had, a close to floody draw like we had, the person who sticks the big threats, the person who can keep their Planeswalker defended, the person who has the Carnage Tyrants online sooner, that's the person advantaged, not the person with the most Jadelight Rangers and the highest life total. I think that it was a good example of that in that game, and that's why I'm monologuing about it a little bit. Well, those were certainly some exciting games, and I had a really good time in them, some tough matches, and I think you saw the flexibility of the sideboard really come into play. I hope that you will check out more about Seth Manfield. There are some links in the description, including a link to what I would call your homework. Owen Turnwald versus Seth Manfield in the finals of the Magic World Championships in 2015. One of my favorite matches and an awesome mid-range mirror. If you want something more recent with this deck, look up footage from the top 8 of Grand Prix Milwaukee. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to leave me feedback on if you like this video, if you like this type of content. It really does help. I read all my comments. I can't always respond, but I read them all. As always, I will see you in the next video. Goodbye. My YouTube channel is proudly supported by HauntedFlower.com, shipping officially licensed apparel anywhere in the world, and now featuring Magic the Gathering apparel and accessories. If you use the promo code CGB at your checkout, you can save 10% on any order. That's the promo code CGB at checkout on HauntedFlower.com. That's HauntedFlower.com.